Hello and welcome to the Profit Show. I'm Monica Profit, your host, and I'm here today with David Carvalho of Naoris Protocol. Thank you so much for joining us, David, especially with your difficult to pronounce last name. I appreciate the opportunity to try to pronounce it better each time.
That's so sweet. Thank you so much, Monica. It's a pleasure, and it's a pleasure for me to hear it, trying to pronounce it, and getting better at it every time. It's
I'm
good.
just gonna embrace the fact that I will embarrass myself with trying to pronounce things that I just have never tried before.
I love it. Always try.
Well, I want to give you an introduction here because you've got a really cool protocol that I want to dive into, and it deals with cyber terrorism and quantum threats and all kinds of really cool cybersecurity issues that I have a lot to learn about. I'm excited to learn about it, but I just want to give a little bit of an introduction to you so that people know who you are. Your bio says David Carvalho is the founder, CEO, and chief scientist of Naoris Protocol, a decentralized security layer and post-quantum post-quantum infrastructure. So that's a huge mouthful to me. It's so much out of my league. I'm excited to learn more. Also, you're a longtime cybersecurity expert who advises nation states on cyber espionage, war, and terrorism. Also involved with many other blockchain projects, CDBCs, and cybersecurity projects. So I'm really excited to get into this post-quantum idea. I think it's been floating around quite a bit in my little Bitcoin world, where I think, well, could something post-quantum take down something as robust as Bitcoin? And there's always been this sort of floating question to me in that world, but never have I understood really what a post-quantum cybersecurity and especially decentralized network or framework would actually do to provide further security. So this is exciting for me as a trader, as an investor, as just a general nerd, but also I'm glad that you're a bigger nerd and you're here to nerd out even more. So yeah, this is amazing. You've been a nerd for a very long time too. It's kind of amazing. I think you got first involved in cybersecurity when you were 15. Is that right? Is that correct?
Yeah, a bit earlier when I was about 13, but yes, yes, yeah.
13. Wow. So what have you seen sort of in this space? I mean, I'm not going to say that's been a very, very long time. I'm not trying to age you, but maybe there's been a little bit of time that's passed since then. How have you seen the space, change in this period of time?
Oh yeah, it's definitely been a while. Like you can see the white hairs over here. I'm not that young. But yeah, at the time, not even sure if it even had a name. It was just a collection of tools and techniques that you'd use to like undelete stuff and maybe encrypt some data and so on and so forth. There wasn't really roles defined in companies in this space at all. Mainly the people that worked in this area. I would say the majority of them will either work in law enforcement or agencies. Um, I got interested in the area based on two facts. One, I was in a small village that not much happened there. And second, my dad decided to buy a computer and I have no idea why. And what happened was that I just got very, very interested in technology, and it wasn't a very good computer, so I couldn't really play games. So I really got into other areas of what you could do with the computer. And some of my friends and neighbors actually started, going deeper into, areas that you would today call cyber forensics. At the time, it was just called like undeleting stuff.
Wait, so basically you were just driven by boredom with like this new tool, this new toy in the middle of kind of nowhere where you didn't have a lot of options. So really it was just like you needed to keep yourself interested and then you were like decided to undelete things. That was
Yeah, absolutely a new toy. Yeah. So, and, don't take me wrong. I love where I grew up, and I love all the things that I could do, around nature and observe and all these things. But I was somewhere in the spectrum. So if I focused on something, I went deep into into the rabbit hole and see where the white rabbit leads. And that's what happened with computing in general, and that's what happened with in the end turned out to be, you know, uh, a highly valuable area that I was just lucky to be early into and got very excited over. Because I would say, going back to your question, like, over time this area is metastasized immensely. So it wasn't it became something that is a pillar to every institution, every government, every organization, and even the way how you plan things and you do business and you know how you plan your life even. But there was not even a semblance of an idea that could be possible back in the day. But when I eventually got to the point where I was working with some parties connected to law enforcement across Europe, and also started dealing with leaders connected to nation state critical environments and so on, I realized that it was, well, a lot more than I thought it could be when I was younger, right? And right now we know that the whole space is a mix of try your best to actually mitigate risk versus how can I say, so there's two main sides. One is like one that's trying its best to mitigate risk all the time, and the other one that's trying for the other one to be just wrong once, so that they can actually attack you or exploit something that will lead to something potentially illegal and connected to making money. At the time, it was not like that at all. It was much more focused on just for fun things. We called it
Yeah.
for the lulz, yeah, which is for fun. But ironically, it's the same kind of techniques, basic techniques that you would use today, even for offensive cyber.
Well, you're lucky, I guess, that your father didn't just get like, a video game console and like now you
Oh
could just
yeah,
be like a Pong, world champion or something. Instead,
I,
you've
I
actually
think about
turned
that
it
all the
a
time.
whole
I don't
career.
think I would be world champion of any game. It just happened that because it just my nature. If something is very hard, or at least if there's a perception that something is hard, I find it extremely enticing, and that's eventually what led me to kind of like lose, tens of thousands of hours, quote quote, not lose, but and spend them in that fashion. And everything that you live in your life eventually leads to who you are. And so here we are.
That's funny because after college, I had not studied what I wanted to study in college as much as I realized later. So by about 25, I realized I just really wish I had studied art. And I also at the time realized I was not inherently good at it. So it was actually the hardest thing. I was pretty good with numbers and spreadsheets and
Yeah.
analysis and social sciences and STEM stuff. But like art was so hard. A visual vocabulary was just like, and I thought that's the hardest thing. I'll never actually be excellent at it. That's great. I'll have a lifelong challenge. I should be an artist. And that's like how I chose it at the time. It was the hardest thing to do. So I appreciate your approach.
Oh yeah, that's a really cool story that you share that, because actually, art is quite subjective, right? So,
Yeah.
and when you're talking about like technology, it's very much ones and zeros, right? It either is or it isn't. There's nothing in between. But with art, no. With art, I think the complexity there, quote quote, I guess, is and this is kind of like me parachuting into the space because I love art, and I am a bit of a digital artist too. I used to work for Electronic Arts a long time ago,
Oh,
and
no way.
yeah. So I was kind of like an environmental designer, world designer for some games and other things,
Oh,
and
very cool.
I really enjoy that. But there is a huge part of art that I definitely don't understand, and maybe just because I'm not educated on it. But it seems incredibly subjective to the point there. For example, if a banana taped to a wall costs $5 million, I don't. I'm not sure if anybody understands that. But for me, probably contrary to most people who deal with art, and maybe they're just going to they're smashing me about this right now. Like, I think that probably takes away value from art. But that's just my opinion in my own ignorance.
It's not necessarily ignorance. There's so much to learn in that space. It's baffling, and it's also wonderful that it's so subjective. A lot of times, most of the
Yeah.
insights that come about, once it can actually be analyzed, it's usually in retrospect. Oddly, you'll find that like Einstein and Picasso both came to very similar things, very similar conclusions, but Einstein actually came 4 years after Picasso. So the right-brained individuals that are working these things out in the visual vocabulary
Yeah.
have throughout history arrived at these visual representations before science can understand it. Same thing with 3-point, our perspective that was in the Renaissance. It wasn't understood, in terms of physics for another few hundred years. So it
It's a
happens this way, that we
fascinating.
come to these ideas, we express them, and we don't know what they are, and it takes a long time to come up with a theory that actually can analyze it and put it in context with the left brain. It's crazy. So
It's a
yeah.
fascinating perspective because it's kind of like that's a good example of divergent evolution, right? There's two humans in two different places that were exposed to different things. Maybe their mind worked in a similar way and they went in completely different directions, and they still managed to kind of like, find new worlds, let's say.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, between you making different worlds and environments in video games, as well as new infrastructure, and this, it's like building something that's new. I think there's a creator consumer sort of spectrum that every human being falls on in different ways. Like, I didn't create this, but I like to create other stuff. And some people are more inclined towards creating versus consuming. And
Yeah.
some people just look out at the world and things, and they're like, I want that, I want that, I want that, and that's great. And then
Yeah.
some people look out and they're like, I don't want I want something that I haven't seen before. And then I go make it, So, you've been building now like decentralized infrastructure and all kinds of things that are very post quantum. But honestly, I can wrap my mind around the idea that you were building environments for video games or undeleting things. That kind of makes sense. But like, give me what is this decentralized infrastructure, or even like if it's also a network, is it like DePIN? I mean, how does this, explain this to me like I'm 5, because I basically am.
Right. So very simply, there are some fundamental problems in digital that are nobody's fault, but it's just how the digital world was created and projected that lead to fundamental problems. And I think some of these fundamental problems are solved to a point by blockchain or by blockchain technology, or through decentralization approaches. And there's problems with that, and I'll explain a little bit more about the quantum problem there, because it's about the backbone of it being now weak to quantum computers, which is just cryptography. But as I kind of like advanced and I became advanced in my career, that is, and I became like global chief of security for a number of multi-billion-dollar companies in many different spaces. I got to meet really interesting people in conferences and in very kind of like critical areas of society, including on areas that are very much focused on innovation, which are areas related to national interests or national critical infrastructure or defense and other areas. And I ended up making friends with and building work connections with former NATO leaders at the time. In other people in those spaces like generals and others, mainly in Europe, and it was very exciting to me that whole artistic part of innovation, I would say that there is an art to it, I guess, was very present in those spaces where companies are a lot more kind of like risk averse. I wouldn't say risk averse, but if something is working for you, you don't change it.
Yeah, right.
So
Right.
companies are not really focused in disrupting themselves. But I am really passionate about that. And again, like I found a really hard problem that is cyber, and as a CISO, that wasn't the solution. Like it's just a question of time, regardless of how many budget you have, you're going to get breached. And that's because, well, you have a limited budget and you can do your best, but there is no magic bullet. And if anybody says there is, either they're up to no good or they don't know what they're saying, because the amount of threats that are out there are unlimited, and they are also limited by the human imagination, which is more art. And that doesn't have a budget, right? It's kind of like it's invention associated with necessity, and also criminal organizations and many other things, and interests and national interests and so on, and all these things kind of like cross-pollinate. So in a conversation with now the former chief of intelligence of NATO, Mr. Hagen, that became a really good friend and mentor at the time, an idea was floated. Wouldn't it be interesting to decentralize how networks and machines work, so that they can actually create some sort of like protocol between them that could prove that they are in a good state as they work with each
Oh,
other, right?
yeah.
So instead of being like silos, where they're kind of like just rely on themselves, they actually rely on each other. So they act like an army pretty much, instead of being like a collection of silos. And that to me was really interesting, that conversation was brought up, because I already had this idea that then I shared with him, and that then brought him to the company, of creating an Naoris protocol, which I looked at it kind of like as a hyperstructure, right? How can I define that? So for example, there's I'm not sure if you ever heard of like Kardashev level civilizations. So Kardashev is a writer. I believe he was also a scientist, and he looked at like various stages of evolution for civilizations.
Hmm.
And level zero, I would argue, that's kind of like the one we are in now, which is kind of like regional, their own languages, their own cultures, and slowly becoming a level one civilization, which is a global civilization that communicates in unison, maybe can control their atmosphere, their climate, their technology, maybe even evolution in their planet. Then level two, as we expand as humans outside of the planet into Mars, into the moon, into outer space, so on, right? And then there was other levels all the way to galactic, right? And I thought that blockchain, looking at it, was for me an obvious kind of like level one to level two civilization
Yeah,
technology, like fundamental technology.
yeah,
And I saw it being used just for cryptocurrencies, which is
yeah.
probably the dumbest way you could use it. And there's so many other options. Of course, I mean, I understand why it is used for that, because there's immediate cash money there,
Well, if
right?
you think about it, like the Web 2, or at least I don't know, the early internet was sort of
Yeah,
driven by very basic stuff, communication and porn. I mean, pretty much that's kind of all we had.
yeah,
That was
yeah,
the big drivers. And so when we think about this next, level, is like iteration of the internet, where it's like the internet of money and finance and transactions
yeah,
and,
yeah,
fraud
yeah.
proof, then it's going to be, yeah, the next thing. Money is basically just the Web 3 version of porn. It's just the next thing we're addicted to. We like, oh, that's really important. We should
Yeah,
delete
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Okay,
that's
sure. We'll get to more
exactly.
nuanced things later, but okay,
Yeah,
fine.
where do you get your dopamine from? Porn or money, right?
Right.
Right. Okay, I got it. So yeah, so for me, that was an obvious kind of like technology that should be leveraged. So I thought, why don't we put the most mature areas of cyber together with the most mature areas of AI and cryptography in a decentralized context? So we started doing research and applying to major global incubators of technology, that we ended up winning a very good amount of them in very different areas, proving that this is a fundamental technology that would support any sort of like digital paradigm. And it got to a point where it was very clear that the problem that we're solving, or that we're looking to solve, and the mandates that we're having also from the visionary leaders that I was working with, like the generals and others from different countries in Europe, their vision was, okay, we have a collection of very critical things, right? They are all single points of failure towards each other, right? They're all points of entry towards each other, right? So the more you have, the harder it becomes to defend them.
Yeah.
How do we deal with this, right? So the way that we thought, or that we thought at the time to deal with that, is that to create a Web3 based communication protocol that was based on math, so based on cryptography, for all these systems to communicate with, and each one of them would be a participant, right?
And is this
So
your proof of security
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
protocol? Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's what led to our consensus mechanism that's called distributed proof of security. That's at the core of the protocol. And then there is a decentralized AI mechanism called Swarm AI that learns with all systems with data by all systems, and then they together achieve consensus on what's acceptable or not. So in other words, if I want to say tamper with the state of a system in any traditional network, in a Web2 network, I just need to tamper with the state of that system. That's it.
Yeah.
And if I want to access a network, eventually, you tamper with a device, you exploit the vulnerability, then you take over whole organizations and ransomware them or whatever, right? Or you exfiltrate information, whatever you want to do. So these single point of failures are the biggest issues, I would say, for humanity's development, because the more complexity we create, the harder it is to maintain it.
Yeah.
So really what we have created is kind of like a universal protocol of trust where all the participants are validating the state of all the others as they are
Okay.
participating, right? So the more this grows, the more resilient it becomes, right? And so the more complexity there is, the more resilience there is, which is pretty much the opposite of what exists right now. And that was seen as a really good idea. And then we decided to, again, under a mandate of some of these former NATO leaders, because they were seeing cryptography as a big risk into the future, even for their countries. We decided to go into the post-quantum cryptography realm.
So
So
when you mentioned like the part of like swarm AI, where like there's an AI piece of this as well, does that mean like as there's this consensus mechanism that's constantly validating and revalidating to one another, is it also learning more and more nuance about that validation?
That's right.
So it's like
That's
a perpetually refining protocol almost.
Absolutely. So it's kind of like to think of it kind of like as a hive mind being, right? Where all
this is not futuristic at all. No, it's fine.
but you see, like it's kind of like how our immune systems work in a way. Like, we have a hive mind within our body, right? So if something happens in a certain place, there's like certain cells that will send a chemical signal that's captured by some nerves that will tell your brain to produce more of that, right? Produce more of this, right? Right. So it's but we don't have that for digital systems, right? We have a purely reactive environment that the more complex it gets, the more risky it becomes, and the more harder to defend it becomes. And under this different paradigm, it's the opposite. So the more complex it becomes, the more points of validation there are, the more resilient it becomes. So for you to tamper with something locally, you don't just need to tamper with something locally, you actually need to tamper with everything everywhere because they're all in consensus, right?
Yeah. 51% of it at least, right?
Actually, under our consensus mechanism, you would have to go way beyond that because so this was created for national state level resilience. One of the things that they wanted was to mitigate some of the risks that exist in blockchains. So we ended up, I'll try not to get too technical, but we ended up creating new technology that allowed you to fundamentally trust the validators, because then the question arises like, who's watching the watchers, right? And in blockchains right now, there is this idea that blockchains are kind of magical and they run in the atmosphere, but actually, and they are decentralized and all. But the fact is that they're running from servers, right? Somewhere in the cloud or people's computers or whatever. These are centralized systems, right? So these are central points of failure to whatever they are serving, which in this case are blockchains, right? So we had to change how this worked. We, as part of creating the distributed proof of security, we created a methodology that allows for us to prove that a certain node that is part of it is actually in a trusted state. If it's not, you don't want it to participate, right? This is really powerful, and that's one of one of our key innovations, let's say. And then we back that proof, and I don't mean to be philosophical, with the trust that comes over the a quantum proof, let's say. So it's not just a proof with current cryptography. It's a proof that's resistant into the future, right? That even a quantum computer cannot break. So you actually know that even if an adversary is there, they cannot change the truth about the matter. Because that's really important, because right now, in any context, it doesn't matter if it is in AI or in any other environment, you have absolutely no way to prove that something is or isn't. So if you see something on your screen that comes from, say, I don't know, you go to ChatGPT, you ask a question, you have no idea if the question that the server is receiving is the same one that you're asking, or if it was changed in transit. You have no idea if the model has been hacked or not. You have no idea if the data that it's consuming and learning on has been changed by, I don't know, the Chinese government, so you change your opinions on something. You have no idea of nothing. You just assume that everything is fine. And the whole world is built on these assumptions. And these assumptions are really dangerous because they lead us to make wrong decisions, right? And what we wanted to create was this kind of like fundamentally more resilient system that keeps these, principle of sensitive proofs in mind from the beginning and across the whole operation. So you can prove on-chain in a mathematical way that when you did that and you got that answer, every part of it was good, right? This is just an example, but this works for anything.
And that's, I mean, that kind of leads into my next question. Maybe you almost kind of already answered it, but it's just because you advise nation states on such, critical matters of security and potential threats and all the way to wars. That's just not the typical, consulting gig, like, oh, let's hop on Fiverr and find the guy that's going to, advise a nation state. But, so like not many people have even that experience or that exposure, but like, how do you see the threats that like large governments are facing that are just unique to that level of operations versus like even multinational companies or other organizations that are just, technically smaller or differently organized to begin with?
So I see blockchain as the future backbone for all digital infrastructure. So in order to do that, you need to create something that is resilient, right? That is built on top of the technology, but it's resilient. That's why we adopted post-quantum cryptography, which is mainly used in military settings. But even then, it's above the Call of Duty. But it's definitely on the objective for all of them. They are very aware of this. It's one of the biggest risks. But there is, how can I say, just to give you an idea, there is a clear roadmap for post-quantum cryptography to be adopted. For example, in the US, it's like 2030 publicly, for all government entities and organizations. Privately, it's probably a lot earlier. But the key here is that if you're looking at every encrypted email, financial transaction, sensitive communication that's transmitted today, it's being, just to give you an idea about the quantum element and the risk that comes from that, it's being systematically collected and stored. This is what's called the harvest now, decrypt later threat, and not for immediate decryption, but as a cryptographic time bomb waiting to happen or waiting to explode. So as soon as, and this could be as early as next 6 months or 12 months or 2 years. And I think we're now, like, I would say it used to be that every year we were 50% closer to that kind of risk. I think now it's like every 6 months we're like 50% closer.
Oh, wow.
And that's really scary. But those organizations and environments that capture these things, they're waiting for quantum capabilities to detonate it, to have access to this information. And this could be anything from nuclear secrets all the way to private keys on blockchains or any other things, because the same cryptography is used transversely across the world. Blockchains are not special; they are just using the same cryptography in a different way. But it's the fundamental cryptography that's at risk, right? So being quantum ready right now, it's absolutely fundamental. And that's something that is in the 2030 plans of most countries right now. So going back to the point of critical environments and nation states and advising such environments, it's really eye-opening, and because there are threats that can come from threat actors that are at nation state level that are potentially worse than or at the same level as worse, or that can lead to conflict in the real world, but that actually start in the cyber realm. So cyber right now is actually considered as one of the if not actually, it was considered in some years ago as another pillar in warfare. So land, sea, air, and cyber. Right now, cyber is considered as the underlying pillar. So all of them are defined by it, and it can probably win or lose a war or any other kind of conflict before it even starts. So it's definitely at the core of most strategic decisions made by advanced nation states these days.
That's incredible. I mean, and when you say like a post being quantum ready at that level, there's been some talk that like Naoris is sort of similar into like a giant that's a legacy giant like Cloudflare. But it sounds to me like what you've got is something that really you offer something, especially because of the decentralized nature of the infrastructure that you're working with. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, is that key and like core to what like sets you apart, or how is it that
Yeah.
we are more quantum ready now with Naoris versus what we were with a legacy solution like Cloudflare?
Well, to tell the truth, there's two things to say about that. One is the cryptography itself. So post-quantum cryptography is transparent. It's a tool, right? You can use it to encrypt data, and it is supposedly resilient to quantum computers for a long while. What we have done is we grabbed that technology and we put it on a framework, and this framework is a decentralized trust framework. With that, you can actually use it as fundamental technology to support any other sort of tool. And the tool that could be supported, it doesn't matter if it was Cloudflare or a banking system or an AI. You want to be sure of three or four main things. You want to be sure of its confidentiality, right? You want to be sure of its integrity as you operate it. You want to be sure of its availability, so you want to always be ready, so be resilient, and you want to be sure of its trust. So the trust part is the one that we have created in a decentralized way that was never done before, right? And I argue that's probably the most important part because we could never have that before. All those assumptions that I told you, we couldn't escape them. But with the decentralized consensus mechanism for trust built on top of post-quantum cryptography, which is very resilient, so it means you can trust the truth that you're saying.
Yeah.
It's really, really powerful because for the first time, machines can actually prove to us that they are trusting each other.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
it's very, very hard for me to break that trust. So as a participant that is anonymous and agnostic on such a network, I don't know who the other participants are, right? So I don't know who to attack if I want to change something else somewhere else,
Yeah.
right? So that's a very resilient approach, and I've thought deep and hard myself, and our advisors and partners, and some of the people that created the internet that are in our advisory board and things like this. We cannot find a more logical way that will lead us to Web4, right? Which is an always on AI backed internet with quantum driven, quantum resilience, so on and so forth. That is constantly in a trusted state. Like this needs to happen. This is like the next logical step. So that's the part around the cryptography and the trust. And now, if you take a step back into the Cloudflares of the world and other kind of like security products, again, these are tools, just like cryptography, right?
Yeah.
They are not frameworks. So you can use Cloudflare in the Cloudflare context,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you can't use Cloudflare to prove that, for example, a document is properly digitally signed and it's resilient to quantum computers. And you can also not prove with Cloudflare that, I don't know, a certain banking system or AI system is in a trusted state as you make a transaction, right? If you click the button on your phone, the bank can't use Cloudflare to prove that your phone is in a trusted state and the transaction is made on a trusted system, right? So that's the difference between a tool and a framework. So you have actually turned what is normally a tool into a fundamental universal technology that can be used in any context to prove trust over any operation. Which, if you think about it, it's extremely powerful because you no longer need to, reduce yourself to assuming things that you don't know they are, for a fact true. So how can I say this? This is an environment that we see as having massive potential. We have, for example, in our what we're calling our test net, which is kind of like it's one of our we made a use case public, so there's probably infinity of use cases or tools on top of this technology. We made one of them public that basically allows people to download it into their browser, and it's a node, it's a browser-based node, and it just as you go doing your living, whatever you do on the internet, as you go to websites, it looks at the website code, and if there's something malicious there that's stealing your credit card data or crypto data or stealing your de-anonymizing you or giving you malware or phishing, it will blacklist it and share it with every other participant and vice versa. So
So
that's that
how?
hive mind of trust, right?
So this is available to the public at large. How can someone
Yeah,
go
yeah.
and download this and start using it today? Where
Well,
does
yeah. That's
go?
available to the public at large, and we have actually probably mitigated more threats than the top, companies in the world in cyber, even though, again, we're not a cyber company. We have some cyber use cases. This is
So
one of
maybe
them.
people can just go to Naoris's website and
Oh,
download
yeah,
this now. Oh, that's
that's right.
wonderful. I'm
Yeah,
doing
that's
that
right.
as soon as we
So
hang
we
up.
have
That's
about
great.
2.6, I believe, million people using it at the moment. That happened in
Fantastic.
like 3 months, I
And that's how
guess.
you have hundreds of thousands of wallets and nodes and everything.
Yes.
It's basically through that first test use case. That's amazing. And you
Yeah,
raised $40
absolutely.
million pre-mainnet, correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So that's exactly right. And we wanted to prove that this technology worked and that it was also stable. So we have done around, I think, more than 70 million post-quantum transactions. So all these things are backed by these validations of trust.
And you have a token
Um,
generation event coming up, right?
yeah. We're currently on our public sale,
All right.
which is going quite well. Um,
What's the ticker?
What's that?
What's
Oh,
the
the
ticker?
ticker. We are not in exchanges yet, but you can find our reserved ticker already in CoinMarketCap. It's $ Naoris.
All right. Naoris,
Yeah,
it's the
yeah,
whole word. Okay. It's
yeah,
not like a
yeah.
four letter quick easy. It's like it's not truncated, it's just the full Naoris. I love it.
That's yeah, exactly, that's what it is. And yeah, we're going to TG next month, so in June.
That's great. And is this
Um,
part, does this like weave into also, like you've talked a bit about ethical wealth generation? Can you, are these two things tied together in any way? Have you done something with the tokenomics or the approach, how you've gone to market with it? Like what's the ethical sort of approach to this from your
Yeah,
perspective?
that's a really good question. So there we want to, we see the community, the massive community that has come around us as the beating heart of the protocol moving forward, right? Even though there are many, enterprise use cases, nation state use cases, GovTech, so on. The people that are going to be running validators, nodes, participating, etc., and that are going to be owning the tokens and staking them, and for services or providing services to others or developing on top of the protocol are it, right? So we believe that there are an infinity of wealth generating opportunities for people to come in the protocol and develop on top of it, because everything that you can imagine that has any value needs to be proven to be in a trusted state at every point, right? And that's to mitigate, fraud, lack of compliance, collusion, hacking, and many other things, right? So any use case from healthcare to banking to DeFi to even proving existing blockchain nodes are in a trusted state for other chains.
Yeah.
It just makes sense to do that in general for any sort of use case. Also, altogether with using, for example, the post-quantum cryptography operations, which currently we are the first post-quantum chain in full operation, in full production. As I mentioned, we're probably going to do in a month 100 million transactions in a month's time at post-quantum level. These things can be used for encryption, right? So you can actually encrypt data with the keys that
So
you're seeing.
how do you see like this token, potentially this token sale or this way of engaging like the average normal individual as different from a different ethical standard from like how, anybody who's just going to release a token and it's going to go up or it's going to go
Oh yeah,
down or whatever. How is
yeah,
this
it's very
different?
different. It's very different. So what this is, it's a decentralized cyber trust mesh that they are part of, and they will be supporting any sort of use case that's built on top of it, right? So their validations, they are not really validating transactions of crypto, right?
Yeah.
They are validating the trust state of devices as they do operations and their processes and the services and their hardware, right? And infrastructures. So in reality, they are an infrastructure for an infrastructure, right? They
Yeah.
are supporting. So that's why we called it a hyperstructure, right? So it's like it doesn't matter what protocol you're using. This is not competitive. This is a
Yeah.
boost, right? It's kind of like it brings you to the next level because if you're using Web3 context, you're going to be resilient against quantum level threats, which will potentially kill all chains as they stand. And at the same time, the infrastructure itself is backed by the dPoSec, the distributed proof of security, which is itself backed by post-quantum again.
Yes.
So this is how I see people participating. I see I see people being able to come in and, for example, suggest projects to us that we have, an allocation of tokens that we can provide them with to support them, and the same with our partners. There's going to be, I think, logically, um, people are going to come up with all sorts of use cases like the one that we made public, right?
Yeah,
We have developed close to 30 other use cases.
that's great.
Um, but
Wow.
they are more specific, right? They are like for healthcare, for, I don't
Hmm.
know, airports, critical infrastructure in different areas that were asked of us. But
That's
I'm
fantastic.
sure
With
people every day are going to have all sorts of ideas to
Oh
use this.
yeah, absolutely. And having, just having a place where people can go not only to get involved in your token generation event, but also to potentially have a proposal,
Yeah,
potentially expand a use case and get involved in the community, run a node. There's just so many entry points for the average individual to sort of get involved and learn more. So we'll create have all the links in the show notes for this, but so
thank you
people
so
can
much.
go to Naoris and find out everything they need to. But I'm personally excited to be able to surf the internet with a lot more security and safety. Do you have any? I mean, this has been a wonderful conversation going through so much from like age 13, now 15, all the way to now. But it's a great way to at least take harness what started as boredom and turn it into something really world changing. This is really cool. And as a crypto holder, I'm like, thank God we're gonna have something that's gonna keep these chains from going down. I would really hate to lose my personal net worth just because oops, there was an oops, over somewhere, and we're like every 6 months getting closer and closer to an event that could be happening. So I
Well, yeah,
really
yeah, yeah.
appreciate the work you're
I
doing.
would probably close to something like that. Like,
Yeah.
I think that, from a fundamental perspective, and again, cryptography is the backbone of everything, is the backbone of crypto. That's why it's called crypto. But all that cryptography is currently vulnerable to quantum computers. And quantum computers, as you know, they are not theoretical, they are real.
Yeah.
And,
And
the most important thing is that both blockchains and traditional systems are going to be safe against them with our technology, either integrating or embracing it in different ways. So it's so that we can all emerge fundamentally more resilient, because this is I would say, quantum is coming for the whole global cryptography, be it Web3 or Web2, like an asteroid that came from the dinosaurs,
yeah,
right?
and thank
It,
God you're here doing the work you are, David. It's just been an absolute pleasure having you on and talking about all of this and informing people of not only the threats but the solutions that are coming with Naurist and everything else. So I just want to thank you again for being on the show and coming on and telling us about this. And I can't wait to have a part two to this conversation after you've had your TGE and we got more public facing, um, you know. Um, opportunities for people to just use your amazing technology. This has just been amazing. Thank you so much, David. It's just been such a good conversation. I've learned a lot.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And thank you so much for having me. And stay safe, stay sovereign, and stay quantum.
Thank you so much. This is Monica Prophet of The Prophet Show signing off. I'll catch you on the next episode.